Get your dirty hands off that menu! Animals don't eat in first class. A white flight attendant rips the leather menu straight out of a black man's hands.
First class cabin, Atlantic Meridian Flight 714. 12 passengers watching. He looks up. Steady. Soft. "Ma'am, I have a ticket for seat 2A. She slams her palm on his armrest. "I don't give a damn about your ticket. You smell like you crawled out of a Greyhound bus." She leans in, voice dripping venom. "Now get your broke ass to the back of the plane before I have you dragged off in handcuffs." He sits still, hands folded, silent. She snatches a bowl of hot soup off the cart and pours it. Slow, steady, eyes locked on his, straight down his face. He wipes the broth from his eyes, pulls out his phone, makes one call. That call ended her career, her name, her whole life, gone before the wheels touched the ground. 5:45 in the morning, Atlanta. The sun hasn't cracked the skyline yet. Inside a penthouse in Buckhead, the only sound is water hitting the bottom of a steel kettle. Calvin Harris stands barefoot in his kitchen, pour-over coffee, Ethiopian roast. He watches the dark stream spiral into the glass, slow and patient. The whole room smells like earth and smoke. No butler, no chef, no assistant hovering with a clipboard. Just a man and his coffee. The penthouse is clean, minimal. Floor-to-ceiling windows frame the Atlanta skyline like a painting nobody paid for. Bookshelves line the far wall, biographies, engineering manuals, a worn copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. No trophies, no framed magazine covers, nothing that screams, "Look at me." Calvin is 42 years old, black. Grew up in a one-bedroom apartment in South Atlanta where the heat cut out every February. His mother worked 2 jobs. His father left before he could remember the man's face. Now he owns Pinnacle Dynamics, Fortune 500, tech and defense contracting, government clearance. Pentagon contracts, net worth sitting somewhere north of $2 billion. But you wouldn't know any of that by looking at him. He irons his own shirt, charcoal Henley, dark slacks, clean white sneakers, no Rolex, no chain, no designer label anywhere on his body. He dresses like a man who has absolutely nothing to prove, because he doesn't. His phone buzzes on the marble counter. Derek Moore, Chief of Staff, former Army logistics officer, the one person Calvin trusts with everything. "Morning. The Pentagon brief is confirmed for 3 o'clock. I'll meet you at Dulles." Calvin takes a sip of coffee. "The cybersecurity contract? $900 million. You're the front runner. DOD wants final sign-off face-to-face." "Good. See you on the ground." He hangs up, grabs his leather carry-on. 1 bag. That's all he ever travels with. Before he walks out the door, he catches his reflection in the hallway mirror. A black man in a Henley and sneakers. No entourage. No security. No sign hanging around his neck that says billionaire. He likes it that way. Always has. The loudest person in the room is never the most powerful one. Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, 7:15 a.m. The busiest airport in the world, and it sounds like it. Rolling luggage clattering on tile, PA announcements echoing off concrete, the smell of Chick-fil-A drifting from the food court, crowds moving in every direction like a river splitting around rocks. Calvin moves through it all like water. No rush, no fuss. Boarding pass on his phone. Gate B14, Atlantic Meridian Airlines. Flight 714, Atlanta to Washington Dulles. First class. He boards early. The first-class cabin is small and quiet. 12 seats, 3 rows of 4. Polished wood trim along the overhead bins. Leather headrests. Warm towels folded on armrests. The hum of the auxiliary engines underneath everything like a heartbeat. Calvin slides into 2A, window seat, stows his bag overhead, opens his tablet and starts reading a Pentagon brief. Just another Tuesday. The man in 2B, white, mid-50s, polo shirt, jeans, loafers, is already settled in. He's browsing a golf magazine. Looks like every other executive on every other Tuesday morning flight. Nothing remarkable about him. Then she appears. Brenda Wilson, senior flight attendant, first-class cabin. Blonde hair pinned tight under her cap. Uniform pressed sharp enough to cut glass. A smile stretched across her face like it was painted on with a ruler. Wide, bright, and completely hollow behind the teeth. She stops at 2B, the man in the polo. "Good morning, sir. Welcome aboard. Can I start you with some champagne? We have a lovely brute today." Her voice is warm, musical, like she's greeting an old friend at a country club brunch. He nods. She pours. They laugh about something, the weather, the flight time. She touches his shoulder lightly before she moves on. Then she turns to 2A, Calvin. The smile doesn't fade. It collapses, like someone pulled a plug. Her eyes start at his sneakers, travel up to his Henley, linger on his hands, then his face. She doesn't say good morning. She doesn't offer champagne. She doesn't touch his shoulder. She looks at his boarding pass, then back at him. "Are you sure you're in the right cabin?" Her voice is flat, cold. The warmth she gave 2B is gone like it never existed. The man in 2B, polo shirt, jeans, loafers, was dressed exactly the same level of casual. The only difference between them was skin. The seatbelt sign turned off with a soft chime. The cabin lights dimmed to a warm gold. First-class service began. Brenda started with row 1, smile on, tray out. "Good evening, ma'am. Tonight we have a seared salmon with lemon butter, or the braised short rib with roasted garlic mash. What can I get you?" Row 1, served. Row 3, served. White wine poured, napkins unfolded, silverware set with precision. Then she reached row 2. She stopped at 2B, the man in the polo shirt. "And for you, sir, the short rib is outstanding tonight. I had the chef plate an extra portion just for first class." He smiled, ordered the rib. She poured him a glass of Cabernet, leaned in and whispered something that made him chuckle. Then she turned to Calvin in 2A. She didn't stop. She didn't slow down. She walked right past him like his seat was empty, like he was a stain on the leather she'd rather not acknowledge. Calvin waited. He's a patient man. 10 minutes passed. Every single passenger around him had a full meal in front of them, hot food, real silverware, glass stemware catching the overhead light. The smell of braised beef and garlic filled the cabin like a warm fog. Calvin's tray table was empty. He pressed the call button. The soft chime rang through the cabin. Brenda appeared, but not quickly. She took her time, arms crossed, weight on one hip. She looked at him the way you'd look at a fly buzzing around your plate. "What?" Not, "What can I get you?" Not, "How may I help?" Just, "What?" Calvin kept his voice level. "I'd like to order from the first-class menu, please, and a glass of water would be great." Brenda exhaled through her nose, long and loud, like he'd just asked her to move a mountain with a teaspoon. "We're running low tonight. Most of the options are already gone." She didn't check, didn't glance at the galley, didn't consult a list, just said it. "I'll take whatever's available." She disappeared into the galley. 5 minutes. Then 10. Calvin went back to reading his Pentagon brief on the tablet. The man in 2B was already halfway through his short rib. Brenda came back. She set a tray on Calvin's table. But it wasn't first-class food. It was a cold sandwich wrapped in plastic, a tiny bag of pretzels, a small water bottle with a dented cap. Economy class, straight out of the back galley. Calvin looked at the sandwich, then at the man in 2Bs. Braised short rib with roasted garlic mash, then back at Brenda. I believe the first-class menu includes the braised short rib. I can see the cart is still in the galley. I'd appreciate that instead. Brenda's eyes narrowed. She tilted her head like she was talking to a child who couldn't understand a simple instruction. That's been reserved for the other passengers. Which passengers? There are 12 seats. I count 11 meals served and 1 sandwich. Something flickered behind her eyes. Not embarrassment, irritation. The kind of irritation that comes when someone you've decided is beneath you has the nerve to push back. Look, you got food. Eat it or don't. I'm not arguing with you about a meal. She turned on her heel and walked away. End of conversation. Case closed. Calvin didn't eat the sandwich. He set his napkin on the tray, folded his hands in his lap, and pressed the call button again. This time, he spoke clearly. I'd like to speak with the lead flight attendant, please. Brenda's jaw tightened. She stared at him for a full 3 seconds. Then she turned and walked toward the front galley, her heels clicking on the cabin floor like a countdown. She found Trish Owens in the galley, pouring coffee. Trish was the purser, the lead flight attendant on this flight. 53 years old, 28 years in the industry. She'd seen every kind of passenger complaint there was, and she'd mastered the art of making them disappear. Brenda leaned in close. Her voice was low but sharp. The guy in 2A is becoming a problem. He's been combative about the meal service. Aggressive tone. I think he might escalate. Not a single word of that was true. Trish sighed. She didn't ask what happened. Didn't ask for details, didn't ask to review the situation herself. She just grabbed a coffee pot and followed Brenda back to row 2. Trish stopped at 2A. She looked at Calvin, then at Brenda, then back at Calvin. She put on the voice. Every passenger knows the voice. That syrupy, sing-song customer service tone that sounds kind but means, you are the problem and I need you to stop. Sir, I understand there's been a little misunderstanding with the meal service tonight. I'm sure we can sort this out. Let's all just stay calm, okay? Stay calm. As if Calvin was the one who wasn't calm, as if he'd been shouting, as if he'd done a single thing wrong. Calvin looked at Trish. His voice was steady, measured, every word placed with precision. Ma'am, I've been in this seat for 45 minutes. Every passenger around me has been served a full first-class meal. I was given an economy sandwich. I'm not being combative. I'm asking for the service I paid for. Trish blinked. For a half-second, something cracked in her expression. Something that said, he's right. But then she glanced at Brenda, and the crack sealed shut. I understand your frustration, sir. Let me see what we can do. She walked away, back to the galley. She did not come back. No meal arrived. No apology. No explanation. Nothing. Calvin sat in his seat. The economy sandwich is growing cold on his tray. Surrounded by passengers eating braised short rib with real silverware and drinking Cabernet from glass stemware. 20 minutes passed. Then Brenda came back. She was carrying a tray, a real tray this time. A bowl of hot soup, French onion, steam curling off the surface, a bread plate on the side. For a moment, just a moment, it looked like someone had corrected the situation, like decency had quietly won. She walked toward 2A, stopped directly in front of Calvin. The tray was level with his chest. He looked up. She looked down. Their eyes met. And she didn't set the tray down. She tilted it, slowly, deliberately. The bowl slid first, then the soup. A cascade of scalding broth, onions, cheese, boiling liquid, poured directly onto Calvin's face. His forehead, his eyes, down his neck, soaking through his Henley and into his lap. The bread plate clattered onto his thighs and tumbled to the floor. She didn't stumble. She didn't trip. There was no turbulence. The tray was steady in her hands the entire time. She watched it happen like she was watering a plant. The cabin went dead silent. The hum of the engines was the only sound left. 12 first-class passengers frozen in their seats. The man in 2B had his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. A woman in row 1 pressed her hand over her lips. A businessman across the aisle gripped his armrest so hard his knuckles turned white. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Brenda looked down at Calvin, soup dripping from his chin, broth pooling in his lap, steam still rising from his chest, and she opened her mouth. "Get your filthy ass out of this cabin. You don't belong here. You never did. People like you should be in the cargo hold, not first class." Her voice carried through the entire cabin, clear, loud, unhurried, like she wanted every single person to hear. A woman in row 3 had her phone in her lap. The red recording light was on. She didn't move. She barely breathed. But she captured every word. Calvin sat still, soup burning his skin, broth dripping from his jaw onto the leather seat, his Henley ruined. His tablet screen cracked where the bread plate had struck it. He reached for the cloth napkin on his armrest, wiped his face, slowly, methodically. Forehead, eyes, cheeks, chin. Then he looked up at Brenda, not with anger, not with shock, with something far worse for her: certainty. "You're going to regret this, not because I'm angry, because I don't forget." His voice was barely above a whisper, but in the silence of that cabin, every single person heard it. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, connected to the in-flight Wi-Fi, and sent one message. Brenda didn't back off. She accelerated. Within 60 seconds of pouring that soup, she was already at the cockpit interphone. She pressed the button, waited for the click, and spoke in a voice designed to sound scared. The kind of scared that makes men with authority act first and ask questions never. "Captain, this is Brenda in the first-class cabin. I need to report a passenger disturbance. Seat 2A. He's been verbally aggressive toward the crew. He threatened me directly. I believe he may become physically violent. I'm requesting law enforcement to meet the aircraft upon arrival." Every word was a lie. Carefully constructed, perfectly delivered. She'd done this before. Not the soup, but the framing, the performance. The damsel voice that turns a calm black man into a threat with one phone call. The captain's voice crackled through the interphone. "Understood. I'll notify dispatch. Keep me updated." Brenda hung up. She smoothed her uniform, straightened her collar, took a breath, and walked back into the first-class cabin with the posture of a woman who had just won a war. She stopped at row 2, looked down at Calvin, still seated, still soaked in soup, still silent, and announced it loud enough for every passenger to hear. "Sir, the captain has been notified about your threatening behavior. Authorities will be waiting for you at the gate when we land." She said it like a verdict, like a sentencing, like she wanted the entire cabin to understand that this man, this quiet, soup-drenched, motionless man, was the danger here. Calvin said nothing. He was typing on his phone. His face was still damp. His shirt was ruined. He didn't look up. But the man in 2B did. He turned to Brenda with a slight frown. "Excuse me, I've been sitting right here the whole time. He didn't threaten anyone." Brenda's head snapped toward him. The warmth she'd shown him earlier? Gone. Replaced by something cold and territorial. "Sir, please don't involve yourself. This is a crew matter. For your own safety, I'd ask you not to engage with this passenger." The man in 2B opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at Calvin. Calvin didn't look back. The man turned to face forward and said nothing else. That's how it works. You don't have to silence everyone. You just have to silence one person in front of everyone else. The rest take the hint. The cabin went quiet again. The kind of quiet that feels heavy. The kind where people stare at their tray tables and pretend they can't see what's happening 3 feet from their face. Brenda wasn't done. She opened the overhead bin above Calvin's seat and pulled out his leather carry-on bag, the one he'd stowed himself. She held it by the strap like it was contaminated. "This bag needs to be relocated to the rear of the aircraft. Weight distribution." Weight distribution. On a bag that weighs 8 pounds. In a cabin with 12 passengers. She didn't touch anyone else's luggage. Calvin looked up for the first time. "That's my bag." "I'm aware. It's being moved for safety reasons. Crew discretion." She carried it to the back of the plane, tossed it into an overhead bin in row 32, economy, between a crumpled blanket and someone's backpack. When she returned, she positioned herself in the aisle, 3 feet from Calvin's seat, arms crossed, feet planted, chin up. She stood there like a prison guard watching an inmate, not serving, not working, just watching him. Calvin reached for the napkin dispenser in his armrest to clean the remaining soup from his neck. The compartment was empty. He pressed the call button. Brenda didn't move. She stared at him. Let the chime ring 3 times before she spoke. "What now?" "I need napkins to clean the soup you poured on me." "We're out." They were not out. There was a full stack of cloth napkins in the galley cart, 6 feet behind her. He could see them from his seat. The man in 2B reached into his own armrest, pulled out a cloth napkin, and held it toward Calvin. A small gesture, a quiet one, human. Brenda stepped forward instantly. "Sir," her voice cracked like a whip, "I told you, do not engage with this passenger. If you continue to interfere with a crew safety matter, I will have to report you as well." The man pulled his hand back. The napkin disappeared. He looked down at his tray and didn't raise his eyes again for the rest of the flight. Calvin sat in his soup-stained shirt for the next 90 minutes. The broth dried on his skin. The smell of onion and cheese settled into the leather of his seat. Nobody brought him water. Nobody brought him napkins. Nobody looked him in the eye. Brenda circled his row every few minutes, arms crossed, staring. She wanted him to feel it, the weight of being watched, the suffocation of being trapped in a metal tube at 35,000 feet with a woman who hated you and a cabin full of people too afraid to say a word. But Calvin wasn't thinking about Brenda. He was thinking about the message he'd sent. That single message went to Derek Moore. It read, "Derek, pull the Atlantic Meridian Airlines file. Now." Derek responded in 40 seconds. "The airline? What happened?" Calvin typed back, "Pinnacle Dynamics holds a 42% stake in their parent holding company. Their senior flight attendant just poured a bowl of hot soup on my face in first class and told me to sit in the back. She's now reported me to the captain as a threat. Get legal, investor relations, and PR on a call within the hour. I want a full response team at the gate when we land at Dulles." Derek's reply was 3 words. 2 hours 15? 2 hours 15. They won't know what hit them. This is the part the audience needs to understand. Brenda Wilson didn't just insult a passenger. She didn't just humiliate a man. She poured hot soup on the face of the man whose company owns the airline she works for. 42%. That's not a minor shareholder. That's the majority stakeholder. Calvin Harris has more say in the future of Atlantic Meridian Airlines than its own CEO. And she told him to sit in the back. While Calvin sat motionless in seat 2A with dried soup cracking on his skin, the ground was already shifting beneath Brenda's feet. Derek Moore didn't waste a single minute. He activated every lever Pinnacle Dynamics had, and they had all of them. The legal team drafted a formal demand letter to Atlantic Meridian's board of directors, not to customer service, not to HR, the board, the people who answer Calvin's money. PR prepared a preliminary public statement, controlled, factual, devastating. Investor Relations contacted the board directly with a 3-word message: "We need to talk." When Pinnacle Dynamics says that, people don't finish their coffee. They pick up the phone. Derek personally called the DC Metro Police. He filed an assault complaint against Brenda Wilson. He requested 2 officers at Gate C-22 at Dulles. Not for Calvin, for her. Then he called Garrett Sullivan, CEO of Atlantic Meridian Airlines. Garrett was in his corner office in Dallas, halfway through a quarterly earnings review. Derek's call interrupted everything. The message was simple, clinical, and the worst phone call Garrett Sullivan had ever received. Meanwhile, at 35,000 feet, Brenda was in the galley, leaning against the beverage cart, laughing with a junior crew member. You should have seen his face, soup dripping everywhere. I told him to get his filthy ass to the back where he belongs. She mimed the tray tilt, giggled. Some people just don't get it. First class isn't for everyone. She checked her reflection in the stainless steel of the coffee machine, straightened her cap, smiled at herself. She had no idea that the badge she was wearing would be confiscated before she made it through the jet bridge, that the police she'd called for Calvin were now waiting for her. Every word she'd said, every action she'd taken, had been recorded by at least 2 passengers and a cabin security camera. She had no idea about any of it, but she was about to find out. Garrett Sullivan was sitting behind a mahogany desk in Dallas when the call came through. He picked up on the second ring. The voice on the other end wasn't Calvin Harris. It was Pinnacle Dynamics General Counsel, a woman named Catherine Blake. Harvard Law. 22 years of corporate litigation. She didn't do small talk. She didn't do pleasantries. She did damage. Mr. Sullivan, I'm calling on behalf of Calvin Harris, CEO of Pinnacle Dynamics, your company's largest institutional investor. 42% stake in your parent holding company. Garrett leaned forward. His coffee stopped halfway to his mouth. This morning on Atlantic Meridian, Flight 714 from Atlanta to Dulles, your senior flight attendant, Brenda Wilson, deliberately poured a bowl of hot soup onto Mr. Harris's face in your first-class cabin. She then made racially targeted remarks in front of 12 passengers. She then filed a false report to the captain, claiming Mr. Harris was aggressive and threatening. None of that was true. Multiple passengers witnessed the entire incident. At least 2 have video recordings. Your own cabin security camera will confirm everything. Garrett set the coffee down. His hand was shaking. Catherine continued. Her voice never changed pitch, never wavered, like reading a death certificate. Pinnacle Dynamics is prepared to take the following actions if Atlantic Meridian does not respond immediately. 1. Full divestment of our 42% stake. That's approximately $1.8 billion withdrawn from your company's valuation overnight. 2. Termination of all corporate travel contracts between Pinnacle and Atlantic Meridian, valued at $30 million annually. 3. A public statement released to every major news outlet in the country, detailing exactly what happened on that flight. Silence on the line. Garrett's face had gone white. His CFO, who had been sitting across the desk reviewing spreadsheets, looked up and mouthed, "What's wrong?" Garrett didn't answer him. He couldn't. "Mr. Sullivan, you have until that plane lands to make a decision. That gives you approximately 45 minutes. The line went dead. Garrett stood up so fast his chair rolled into the window behind him. He grabbed his direct line to Atlantic Meridian's operations center and dialed with fingers that could barely find the buttons. "Get me the purser on flight 714, now, right now." 3 minutes later, Trish Owen's voice came through the cockpit relay. She sounded confused, nervous. She'd never received a direct call from the CEO before. "Ms. Owens, tell me exactly what happened in the first-class cabin today. Every detail. Do not leave out a single word." Trish hesitated. For a moment, she considered backing Brenda's version, the version where Calvin was the problem, the version that was easier. But something in Garrett's voice told her that lying right now would be the last professional decision she ever made. So she told the truth, for the first time that day. Brenda refused to serve the passenger in 2A. She gave him economy food while everyone else received the first-class meal. Then she carried a bowl of soup to his seat and poured it on him. Deliberately, I saw it. She told him he didn't belong in first class. She used language I don't want to repeat, sir. Then she called the captain and told him the passenger was threatening her. He wasn't. He never raised his voice. Not once. Garrett closed his eyes. "And what did you do, Miss Owens?" Silence. "Miss Owens, what did you do?" "Nothing, sir. I didn't do anything." That was the worst answer she could have given, and it was the most honest one. Garrett hung up. He made 4 calls in the next 10 minutes. Atlantic Meridian's head of HR, the chief legal officer, the VP of corporate communications, and finally, Derek Moore, who answered on the first ring. "Mr. Moore, this is Garrett Sullivan. I want you to know that Atlantic Meridian is taking immediate action, full and unconditional." Derek's voice was calm. "Good, because we've also contacted DC Metro Police. Officers will be at gate C-22 when that plane lands. And Mr. Sullivan, they're not there for our client." Flight 714 began its descent into Washington Dulles at 11:47 a.m. The captain made an announcement that no one expected. "Ladies and gentlemen, upon arrival, please remain in your seats until the crew provides further instructions. Thank you for your patience." Brenda heard the announcement from the galley. She smiled. She assumed this was about Calvin, about the threat she'd reported. She straightened her uniform, smoothed her hair, practiced the professional, concerned expression she'd wear when the officers boarded and she'd point them toward seat 2A. She walked back into the cabin and positioned herself near the forward door, arms folded, chin up, ready to watch the show. Calvin was still in 2A, still calm, still quiet. His shirt was stained. His skin still smelled like French onion soup, but his eyes were clear. His phone was in his pocket. His hands were folded. He wasn't watching Brenda, he was watching the window, the Virginia landscape rising toward them, the Potomac River catching sunlight below. He knew what was waiting at that gate. She didn't. The wheels hit the tarmac. The cabin jolted. The engines roared into reverse thrust. The plane slowed, turned, and began its long taxi toward the terminal. Brenda took a deep breath, checked her reflection in the galley window one last time, straightened her name badge. The jet bridge connected with a heavy metallic thud. The cabin door opened, and everything Brenda Wilson thought she knew about this day, about this flight, about this passenger, about her own future, ended in the next 60 seconds. The cabin door swung open. Brenda stepped forward first. She always did. Senior attendant privilege. She liked being the face that greeted whoever was on the other side. But today, the other side greeted her. Standing in the jet bridge were 2 D.C. Metro police officers in full uniform, hands on their belts, faces blank. Behind them, 2 men in dark suits, Atlantic Meridian corporate representatives, badges clipped to their breast pockets. And behind them, leaning against the jet bridge wall with a garment bag over one arm, was Derek Moore. Brenda's rehearsed smile held. She assumed this was her moment, her performance. She turned slightly, ready to gesture toward seat 2A, ready to point at the problem she'd manufactured. "Officers, thank you for coming. The passenger I reported is Brenda Wilson?" The voice came from one of the corporate representatives, a tall man with silver hair and a jaw that looked like it had never smiled in its life. Brenda blinked. "Yes, I'm the one who filed the—" "Ms. Wilson, I'm Edward Cole, Senior Vice President of Operations for Atlantic Meridian Airlines. This directive comes directly from CEO Garrett Sullivan." He paused, not for dramatic effect, for legal precision. "You are terminated from Atlantic Meridian Airlines, effective immediately. You are to surrender your crew badge, your aircraft access credentials, and your company identification at this time. You will not return to the cabin. Your personal belongings will be inventoried and mailed to your home address within 5 business days." Brenda's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Her hand went to her name badge, the one she'd straightened in the galley mirror 60 seconds ago. "These officers," Edward continued, nodding toward the 2 police, "are here regarding a criminal assault complaint filed against you by the passenger in seat 2A. Brenda's face went white. Not pink, not pale. White. The color of paper. The color of someone watching their own life exit their body. "Assault? I didn't... He was the one who... He threatened me. I was just doing my..." "The passenger you assaulted is Calvin Harris." Edward's voice didn't waver. "He is the CEO and founder of Pinnacle Dynamics. His company holds a 42% ownership stake in Atlantic Meridian's parent holding company. He is, for all practical purposes, the single largest owner of this airline." The jet bridge went silent. Behind Brenda, in the cabin, passengers were straining to hear. The man in 2B had unbuckled his seatbelt and was leaning into the aisle. The woman in row 3 still had her phone recording. Brenda's legs buckled slightly. She caught herself on the jet bridge railing. Her mouth moved, but the words came out broken. Fragments. I didn't know. The system. He didn't look like... I was just... Ma'am, one of the officers stepped forward. His voice was professional, flat. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. They read her rights in the jet bridge, the same jet bridge she'd walked through 1,000 times, with her chin up and her badge gleaming. The same corridor where she'd laughed with coworkers and complained about passengers and felt untouchable. She wasn't laughing now. They removed her badge. They removed her credentials. They placed her hands behind her back. The handcuffs clicked shut, a small, precise sound that echoed off the metal walls of the jet bridge like a period at the end of a sentence. Brenda Wilson was escorted off the jet bridge and into the terminal, past the gate agents, past the boarding area, past a group of passengers waiting for the next flight who stared and whispered and took photos with their phones. She didn't look up, not once. Back on the plane, Trish Owens stood in the galley, gripping the edge of the beverage cart. Her face was gray. Edward Cole turned to her. Ms. Owens, you are suspended pending a full internal investigation. You will be contacted by HR within 24 hours. Please collect your personal items and deplane. Trish nodded. She didn't speak. She couldn't. Calvin was the last passenger to leave the aircraft. He stood in the aisle, soup stains still visible on his Henley. Derek met him at the cabin door, handed him the garment bag. Fresh shirt, black, your size. Calvin took it. Changes in the jet bridge, buttoned the collar, adjusted the cuffs, folded the soup-stained Henley and placed it in a plastic bag. It would be evidence later. Derek checked his watch. Pentagon meeting is in 90 minutes. Car's waiting. Calvin nodded. He stepped through the jet bridge and into the terminal. The gate area was buzzing, people pointing, whispering, a few phones raised in his direction. He didn't acknowledge any of it. He walked straight ahead, shoulders level, eyes forward. He didn't look back, not once. The video hit the internet at 9:47 p.m. Eastern Time. The woman in row 3, the one who'd held her phone in her lap for the entire flight, uploaded it to Twitter with a caption that read, "Watch a flight attendant pour hot soup on a black man's face in first class. This happened today, on my flight." The clip was 2 minutes and 14 seconds long. It captured everything. Brenda walking toward seat 2A with the tray, the pause, the eye contact, the slow, deliberate tilt, the soup cascading down Calvin's face, the steam rising from his chest. And then her voice, crisp, clear, unmistakable, cutting through the cabin silence. "Get your filthy ass out of this cabin. You don't belong here." By midnight, the video had 3 million views. By morning, it had 11 million. The hashtag spread like wildfire. Hashtag Atlantic Meridian Racism. Hashtag Calvin Harris. Hashtag Justice at Cruising Altitude. Hashtag Sit in the Back. That last one burned the hottest, because it echoed something older, something this country was supposed to have moved past a long time ago. Mina Taylor, an investigative journalist with the Atlanta NBC affiliate, was the first to run a full segment. She identified Calvin, with his permission, and laid out exactly who he was. Self-made billionaire, defense contractor, Pentagon consultant, philanthropist who had donated over $200 million to education initiatives in underserved communities, and the single largest stakeholder of the very airline whose employee had just poured soup on his face and told him to go sit in the back. The public reaction was volcanic. Atlantic Meridian's social media accounts were buried under an avalanche of outrage. Their app rating cratered to 1.2 stars overnight. Corporate partners issued statements reviewing their relationship. 3 major advertisers pulled their campaigns from Atlantic Meridian's in-flight magazine within 48 hours. 2 Fortune 500 companies publicly announced they were suspending all corporate travel bookings with the airline until meaningful accountability was demonstrated. But the internet fury was just the surface. Underneath it, the investigation was already tearing Atlantic Meridian apart from the inside. The airline launched an internal review under pressure from its own board, the same board that answered to Calvin's money. What they found was worse than anyone expected. Brenda Wilson had 4 prior complaints on file. 4. All from passengers of color. One from a black businessman who said she'd refused to serve him a pre-flight drink. One from a Latino family who said she'd publicly questioned whether their first-class tickets were legitimate. One from a South Asian doctor who said she'd moved his luggage without permission and made a comment about people who got upgraded by mistake. All 4 complaints had been filed through proper channels. All 4 had been reviewed by the same person, Patricia Trish Owens. And all 4 had been marked resolved, no action required. Trish hadn't just failed to intervene on Flight 714. She had been burying Brenda's behavior for years. It got worse. Investigators pulled Brenda's messages from an internal employee group chat. The screenshots were damning. Messages about certain passengers who don't deserve first class. Jokes about the wrong people getting upgrades. One message sent 3 months before Flight 714 read, "Had another one today in 1A. Designer bag, fancy shoes, still doesn't belong. You know the type." You know the type. 4 words that said everything about who Brenda Wilson really was. The FAA opened a separate investigation into Atlantic Meridian's crew conduct policies and complaint handling procedures. 2 members of Congress called for a public hearing. Brenda and Trish were both formally referred for legal proceedings. Calvin filed a civil lawsuit against Atlantic Meridian Airlines and Brenda Wilson personally. The claims: assault, racial discrimination under Title II of the Civil Rights Act, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and defamation for Brenda's false report to the captain that Calvin had been aggressive and threatening. The district attorney's office in Virginia filed criminal assault charges against Brenda. Her attorney, a low-cost defense lawyer she found online, built a case that crumbled before it started. Brenda claimed the tray slipped due to unexpected turbulence. The flight data recorder showed 0 turbulence logged during that portion of the flight. She claimed her comments were taken out of context. 3 separate video recordings from 3 separate passengers captured her exact words from 3 different angles. She claimed Calvin had been combative and threatening. The man in seat 2B submitted a written statement saying Calvin never once raised his voice during the entire flight. Judge Dorothy Adams presided over the case. 62 years old, 30 years on the bench. She had a reputation for 2 things: fairness and 0 tolerance for lies told under oath. The trial was short. The evidence was overwhelming. The cabin security camera footage was played in court. The courtroom watched Brenda walk toward seat 2A, watched her stop, watched her eyes meet Calvin's, watched her tilt the tray with steady hands. The courtroom gasped. A juror in the second row pressed her hand to her mouth. A former co-worker, a flight attendant who had worked with Brenda for 6 years, took the stand. She testified about Brenda's pattern of behavior, the comments in the break room, the way she'd refer to black and brown passengers as them, the group chat messages, the culture of silence that Trish had enforced. Then Calvin testified. He sat in the witness chair in a dark suit, hands folded, voice steady. He described the feeling of hot soup hitting his skin at 35,000 feet, The sting, the burn, the sound of it splattering on leather. He described sitting in that seat for 90 minutes with broth drying on his face while no one brought him a napkin. He described being told he didn't belong in a seat he paid for, on an airline he owned. The soup washed off, Calvin said quietly. The words didn't. The courtroom was silent. Judge Adams removed her glasses and set them on the bench. The criminal verdict came first. Guilty. Assault. 12 months probation, 200 hours of community service at a civil rights education center, 2 years of mandatory anti-discrimination counseling, and a permanent criminal record that would follow Brenda Wilson for the rest of her life. The civil case was settled 2 weeks later. The amount was undisclosed, but sources close to the case confirmed it was in the 8-figure range. The settlement included mandatory conditions: company-wide anti-discrimination training for all 18,000 Atlantic Meridian employees, enhanced cabin security cameras on every aircraft, an independent passenger complaint review board with the authority to override internal decisions, and a public apology issued by Garrett Sullivan personally on national television in prime time. Trish Owens was terminated. Her FAA cabin crew certification was revoked for failure to intervene in a crew member's assault on a passenger. She would never work in aviation again. Garrett Sullivan stepped down as CEO 6 months later. The board cited failure of leadership culture. He didn't fight it. He knew. And Brenda Wilson, the woman who had poured soup on a man's face and told him he belonged in cargo, never worked a customer-facing job again. Last anyone heard, she was doing back-office data entry in a windowless room in suburban Virginia. Alone. No passengers, no audience, no power. Just a keyboard and the silence she'd earned. 6 months later, a Tuesday morning, Atlanta. Calvin Harris walked through Hartsfield-Jackson Airport the same way he always did. One leather carry-on, dark slacks, clean sneakers, no entourage, no security detail, just a man and his coffee. He passed the gate where Flight 714 had departed 6 months ago. Didn't stop, didn't slow down, just walked. He boarded an Atlantic Meridian flight, first class, window seat. The cabin looked the same: polished wood trim, leather headrests, warm towels on the armrests. But something was different. Small things. A new placard near the cabin door that read, "Every guest deserves dignity." A tiny camera mounted above the galley entrance that hadn't been there before. New training manual stickers on the crew station clipboard. The changes were quiet, but they were real. A flight attendant approached his seat. Young, black woman, natural hair pulled back, warm eyes. She didn't know who he was. She had no idea that the man in 2A was the reason her training program had been rewritten. The reason her complaint process now had an independent review board. The reason the placard on the wall existed at all. She just smiled. A real smile. Not rehearsed, not calculated, just human. "Welcome aboard, sir. Can I get you anything before we take off?" Calvin looked at her. For a moment, just a moment, he saw Brenda Wilson standing in the same spot. The sneer, the disgust, the soup, the words. Then the moment passed, because this wasn't Brenda. This was someone else, someone better, someone who saw a passenger, not a color. "Just a coffee, thank you." She nodded and walked toward the galley. Calvin settled into his seat, pulled out his phone. A text from Derek. "Pentagon contract signed, 900 million. Congratulations." Calvin typed back. The contract is nice, but the kid who just served me coffee without flinching? That's the win. He put his phone away, looked out the window. The Atlanta skyline caught the morning light the same way it always did. Golden, sprawling, full of people fighting to be seen. The plane taxied, the engines built their low roar, the ground dropped away. Calvin watched his city shrink below him, the city that raised him, the city that told him he wasn't enough, the city that watched him prove otherwise. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in 6 months, he didn't think about soup. Calvin Harris donated every cent of his civil settlement to a foundation he created himself. He called it the Harris Equity in Travel Initiative. It funds anti-discrimination audits at airlines and airports across the country. It provides free legal representation to passengers who experience racial profiling in the air. In its first year alone, it intervened in 43 cases and forced policy changes at 6 major carriers. But here's the thing this story is really about. It's not about Calvin being a billionaire. It's not about the phone call. It's not about Pinnacle dynamics or 42% ownership stakes or 8-figure settlements. It's about the fact that it took all of that power, all of that money, all of that leverage for one man to get basic human dignity on an airplane. Calvin Harris had the resources to fight back. Most people don't. Most people sit in that seat with soup on their face and no one to call. No billion-dollar company, no legal team, no leverage. Just the silence of a cabin full of people who saw everything and did nothing. That's the part that should keep us up at night. Not that Brenda Wilson existed. People like Brenda will always exist. The part that matters is that an entire cabin watched it happen, and only one person, hiding a phone in her lap, did anything at all. So here's my question for you, and I want you to be honest. If you were sitting in seat 2B, right next to Calvin, close enough to feel the heat from that soup, would you have spoken up? Would you have stood up? Or would you have looked down at your tray and stayed quiet, like everyone else? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to hear it. And if this story made you feel something, if it made you angry, or sad, or hopeful, or all three at once, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, because these stories aren't stopping. Because at the end of the day, justice isn't just about what happens in a courtroom. It's about what happens at 35,000 feet, in a restaurant, at a traffic stop, in every space where someone decides another person doesn't belong based on how they look. The question is never whether it happens. The question is whether we let it slide.